Welcome to Swai Files. I'm Swai, and today we're diving into one of the most terrifying mysteries. This is the story of James Schroeder, an experienced hunter who vanished in 1982. Along with two friends, he ventured deep into the woods to hunt moose, but after leaving camp early in the morning, James never returned. What's strange is that, by late afternoon, his two friends heard two gunshots echoing from deep within the forest. Then, nothing but silence. There was no further sign of James after that. The search went on for days, but no one found James. No tracks, no clues, as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. Was James lost, attacked, or pulled into a world no one can explain? What invisible forces lurk in the shadows of this ancient forest, where questions remain unanswered? Stay with us as we delve into unsolved mysteries, where even the most seasoned hunters disappear without a trace. Do you have the courage to confront the unexplainable? I'm Swai, and I'll be your guide as we step into this mysterious world. There are places in the world where, upon entering, one feels something different. A strange energy, an invisible yet powerful presence. Perce National Forest is one of those places. Located in northern Idaho, this forest spans over 2.2 million acres of untamed wilderness. Towering pines, rushing rivers, and treacherous cliffs create a landscape of breathtaking beauty, but also deep mystery. Perce Forest is not just a haven for nature lovers, but the setting for tales of unexplained and unsolved disappearances. Anyone venturing into Perce Forest must be prepared to face the harshness of nature. Temperatures here can change suddenly, turning a warm, sunny day into a bone-chilling snowstorm. Powerful rivers like the Selway and Lochsa flow through deep canyons, where a single misstep could lead to death. However, what makes this forest truly special is not just its wild beauty, but the mysteries hidden behind every tree, in every crevice. Perce is one of the largest national forests, and a place where nature continually challenges those who enter. For those unfamiliar with this land, the forest can quickly become a deadly trap. Unclear trails, easily lost paths, and unpredictable weather make survival here extremely difficult. Even the best hunters, skilled in wilderness survival, have gotten lost and disappeared in Perce without leaving a trace. The forest is named after the Nez Perce Native American tribe, who have lived on this land for hundreds of years. The Nez Perce were known as fierce warriors and excellent horsemen. In 1877, they faced 5,000 U.S. soldiers with only 250 warriors in a bloody battle that lasted for days. They fought not only to protect their sacred land, but also to guard the secrets passed down through generations. The stories of Nez Perce are filled with things modern science has yet to explain. The Nez Perce believe the forest is not only their home, but also the dwelling place of supernatural forces. According to their legends, creatures lurk in the canyons, and spirits wander through the mist, searching for lost souls. They believe the disappearances in Perce Forest are not random, but the work of ancient spirits pulling these people into their world. These stories have been passed down through generations, and whether true or not, they have become a part of the identity of this land. One of the most frightening aspects of Perce Forest is the number of unsolved disappearances in the area. Hunters, adventurers, and even seasoned outdoorsmen have vanished without leaving any trace. Large-scale search efforts involving hundreds of people, aircraft, search dogs, and modern technology have failed to uncover any clues. One notable case is that of James Schroeder, an experienced hunter who disappeared in 1982. He entered the forest with two friends to hunt elk, but after leaving camp early in the morning, James never returned. Strangely, his friends reported hearing two gunshots later that afternoon, but no other signs of James. A massive search went on for days, but no one could find any trace of James or what might have happened to him. This left everyone wondering, what really happened to James? Did he get lost, attacked, or was he pulled into another world that no one knows about? James Schroeder wasn't the only one. Many other cases have occurred in the same area, each filled with bizarre, unexplainable details. Grover Ray is another example. He disappeared in 1958 while hunting with his father and two friends. Despite a 2-year search, no sign of him was found. Strangely, 2 years later, a local resident had a dream about Grover's location. When they followed the dream's instructions, Grover's body was found less than a mile from his campsite. These disappearances have baffled investigators and sparked numerous theories about supernatural forces or mysterious creatures existing in the forest. The Nez Perce people believe that ancient spirits are searching for lost souls, pulling them into the spirit world. Nez Perce Forest doesn't just hold mysteries of disappearances, but is also one of the most treacherous areas in the United States. Deep canyons, rushing rivers, and sudden storms make it a deadly trap for anyone unprepared. Brian Warner, an experienced hunter, disappeared during an unexpected snowstorm in 1951. Although he knew the area well, no trace of him was found after the storm. This raises the question, are these natural elements just the surface of something deeper? Could Nez Perce Forest be a place where invisible forces use storms as weapons to eliminate those who trespass on their land? Each disappearance seems to coincide with sudden bad weather, as if something is deliberately creating them to cover the victim's tracks. One cannot forget the bloody history of the Nez Perce land. The battles between the Nez Perce and the U.S. Army have left indelible scars on this land. According to some legends, the spirits of Nez Perce warriors who died in these battles still roam the forest, seeking revenge for what they lost. These spirits, filled with pain and hatred, are said to be the cause of the strange disappearances we hear about. Some believe Nez Perce Forest has been cursed by the blood of the dead, and anyone who enters without being welcomed will face the wrath of these spirits. Stories of people hearing whispers in the wind, seeing ghostly figures in the thick fog, only heighten the forest's eerie and mysterious reputation. Nez Perce National Forest, a place shrouded in mystery and haunting, has been the stage for unsolved disappearances. Among these stories, the vanishing of James Schroeder sends chills down the spine of many. James, a young and experienced hunter with confidence and survival skills, never imagined that his hunting trip in September 1982 would be the last time anyone would see him. What makes the story truly unsettling isn't just James's disappearance, but the strange, unexplainable events surrounding it. Events that seem to go beyond the boundaries of reality. James Schroeder, Dan Cummings, and David Benesch, all from Wisconsin, had planned a moose hunting trip to Nez Perce National Forest in late September 1982. They were seasoned hunters, and with rifles, tents, and supplies packed, they had no idea that this journey would pull them into one of the most terrifying mysteries Nez Perce had ever witnessed. After a long day of trekking through the deep forest and rough trails, the three men reached the Louse Lake area, a remote spot where nature seemed to absorb every human sound. A light breeze rustled through the tall pine trees, but something hung in the air, a sensation difficult to describe, as though the forest was silently watching their every move. James was the only one who sensed this unease, but he brushed off the vague feeling and continued focusing on the hunt. On the morning of September 25th, James woke early, prepared his 7mm rifle, and brought along 13 bullets, enough to face any potential danger in the forest. His friends woke up later and decided they would meet James back at camp by the end of the day. James left at 6:15 a.m., his steady footsteps gradually disappearing into the thick mist of the forest. From that moment on, Nez Perce seemed to open up a different world for James, a world filled with nothing but darkness and deadly silence. Around 5:40 p.m., Dan and David were still at camp when they heard 2 gunshots coming from the direction of Gedney Creek Canyon. The shots were clear, but no other sounds followed. They waited in silence, thinking James might have shot a moose, but as night fell and James still hadn't returned, worry began to creep in. They lit a fire, sat around it and waited. But the stillness of the night only heightened their anxiety. Rain started to fall, quickly turning into snow, accompanied by bone-chilling winds. The trees twisted in the wind, and eerie howls echoed from the distance, as if Nez Perce Forest was whispering terrible secrets only it knew. Both Dan and David couldn't stop thinking about the gunshots they had heard, shots that had gone unanswered. It seemed as though the forest had swallowed James whole, and every call for him vanished into the void. The next day, Dan decided to venture into the forest to search for James, leaving David alone at camp. The strangeness of this decision raised many questions. Why didn't they go together? Why split up when they knew one of them was already missing? A growing sense of unease, as if an invisible force was seeping into their minds, pushed them into making odd, unexpected choices. Dan followed the path he believed James had taken for hunting, but strangely enough, he found no footprints, no signs of movement. The forest left behind no clues, not a broken branch, not a sound, nothing. It was as if an invisible hand had erased everything, and Nez Perce was determined to keep its secrets. The weather worsened, and thick snow covered everything. Each of Dan's steps was swallowed by the icy silence. He began to feel like prey himself, like something was watching him, following him from the deep, dark shadows. Dan returned to camp, exhausted and trembling. He hadn't found James. That night, neither Dan nor David could sleep. Their dreams were filled with strange images, shapeless figures floating among the trees, eerie sounds of lost souls. They couldn't shake the feeling that James had encountered something they couldn't comprehend, and now, they too were being drawn into the whirlpool of this unsolved mystery. On September 28th, after 3 days of fruitless searching and dwindling supplies, Dan and David decided to leave the camp and seek help. Strangely, they left the mule behind. A curious decision, as animals are often trusted companions in the forest. But perhaps the mule had sensed something they couldn't, an invisible presence, a lurking threat waiting silently. The animal's dull eyes held fear deep within them, fear that no one could explain. When the two returned with the rescue team, the camp was covered in snow. The tent had collapsed, everything was scattered, and the eerie quiet of the forest enveloped everything once more. What sent shivers down their spines was the fact that there was no trace of James. No clue. The gunshots they had heard that day seemed to have dissolved into the air. Extensive searches involving planes, search dogs, and hundreds of people failed to find even a single footprint belonging to James. What was even stranger was the brief disappearance of Dan and David after they left the camp. They didn't return as promised, and when they finally did, they couldn't explain where they had been or what they had done during that time. Both seemed to have lost their memories, or perhaps they had seen something the human mind couldn't accept. The emptiness in their eyes, the tremor in their voices, all pointed to the fact that they had been caught up in something terrifying. Nez Perce Forest has a reputation for being the site of many mysterious disappearances, but the case of James Schroeder is one of the most bizarre. Numerous theories were put forward, from James getting lost in the snowstorm to being attacked by a wild animal. But none could explain his complete disappearance or the strange behavior of his companions. Many began to believe that a supernatural force existed in Nez Perce Forest. Ancient Nez Perce legends spoke of lost spirits and creatures lurking in the dark, hunting those who dared trespass on their territory. The whispers in the wind, the unseen footsteps, all pointed to the possibility that James had encountered something not of this world. Some survivors who ventured into Nez Perce Forest have reported feeling an invisible presence following them, making them constantly feel hunted. They couldn't see it, but they knew it was there, hidden in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. Could it be that this same presence took James, and now it was silently returning to hunt again? James Schroeder's story has no ending. What happened to him remains a mystery, and Nez Perce Forest remains silent in the face of every attempt to uncover its secrets. The disappearances and strange occurrences within this forest only add to its eerie aura, as if Nez Perce is determined to protect a dark secret that no one is meant to know. Perhaps James Schroeder was just one of many victims claimed by this forest, a victim drawn into the darkness, with Nez Perce continuing its silent hunt, holding on to the lost soul. And we can only wonder, who will be next? Nez Perce National Forest has long been associated with mysterious disappearances, but the story of Grover Ray carries an even deeper sense of haunting, not only due to its suddenness but also because of the strange events surrounding it. Grover Ray, an experienced hunter, vanished in the depths of Nez Perce Forest in 1958. His disappearance wasn't just an ordinary missing person case. It served as a warning about what this forest could do to those who dare enter and disregard the dark secrets it conceals. Grover Ray was no stranger to the forest. Born and raised in a family of hunters, He was well versed in every survival skill needed to navigate wilderness areas like Perce Forest. With his strong hands and sharp eyes, Grover could easily track any wild animal in this forest. But in November 1958, when he, his father, and two friends set out on a hunting trip in the Meeker Creek area, it seemed the forest had decided that he would never return. Meeker Creek, located deep within Perce Forest, is known for its treacherous terrain and bleak landscape, always shrouded by dense trees and deep, narrow rivers. This place seemed as though it didn't belong to the world of humans. For Grover, this was just another challenge, another hunt like so many before. But the forest had other plans that would drive a person to madness with its endless, unfathomable depths. That day, Grover left the group to track a large elk he had caught a glimpse of earlier. As always, he planned to meet back with his father and friends at camp by the end of the day. Yet, as night fell, the campfire began to dim without any sign of Grover. Their calls into the night only echoed back the eerie silence of the forest. It was at that moment that a deep sense of dread began to fill the hearts of those left behind. That night, the sky grew dark, and the forest felt stranger than ever before. Grover's father, with his many years of hunting experience, started to sense that something wasn't right. Not just Grover's absence, but the silence of the forest itself. Even the forest birds, usually chirping, made no sound. There were no animal noises, no snapping branches. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The next morning, Grover's father and his two friends set out to search for him. They followed the path Grover had taken, but there were no footprints, no signs that Grover had passed through. All that surrounded them were thick, still trees, seemingly hiding something. Every step they took was swallowed by an unnerving silence, as if the forest was trying to consume them. Their calls for Grover echoed through the cold air, but the only answer was the wind blowing through the branches. 2 weeks later, an official search was launched involving hundreds of people, hunting dogs, and even helicopters. But the events during that search only deepened the mystery of Grover's disappearance. Despite thoroughly combing every inch of the Meeker Creek area, there were no signs of Grover. No footprints, no clothing, and not a single clue that he had ever been there. There were reports from some search team members that they felt as though they were being watched, a sense of unease creeping into their minds as they ventured deeper into the forest. A few even claimed to hear whispers with no clear source, as though the forest was speaking to them, or to someone else. These accounts were quickly dismissed due to lack of evidence, but for those who experienced them firsthand, the fear and chilling sensations stayed with them for years to come. One of the strangest occurrences during the search happened on the 10th day. A member of the search team discovered a section of the forest where the trees had been unnaturally broken. Large branches were twisted, as though some powerful force had bent them. However, as they approached to investigate, the area suddenly became eerily silent. Not a single sound could be heard, not even the wind. An overwhelming feeling of unease spread through the group, prompting them to quickly leave the area without uncovering anything significant. After 2 years of fruitless searching, Grover's family had nearly lost all hope. Time passed, and it seemed the forest had buried all traces of Grover's disappearance. But one day, Sam Sieber, a local resident, had a strange dream. In his dream, he saw Grover lying motionless by a creek, surrounded by towering trees and an ominous darkness. Sieber believed his dream wasn't just a coincidence, but a message from some invisible force. No one truly believed in Sieber's dream, but he decided to search for Grover himself. Along with a police investigator, he ventured deep into the area his dream had shown, a remote location less than a mile from Grover's camp. The two men followed a narrow stream, weaving through dense brush and large boulders. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, as if the forest was closing in around them. And then they found Grover's body. His remains were badly decomposed, reduced to little more than bones, lying quietly beside the creek. Some scraps of clothing remained, but there were no signs of an animal attack or any injury. Strangely, from where his body was found, they could see the area where Grover's group had camped 2 years earlier. Grover had been so close to the camp, close enough that he could have returned if he had wanted to. But somehow he hadn't. The police investigator who witnessed the scene firsthand remarked that it was impossible for Grover to have simply gotten lost. He had hunted in this forest for years, and the spot where his body was found was far too close to camp for his disappearance to be chalked up to getting lost. What had prevented Grover from returning to camp? Had some invisible force held him back, or had the forest itself decided that he would never leave? There were no signs of a struggle, no visible wounds, yet Grover's body had been left in a spot where he could easily have seen the camp from afar. Whatever had happened in his final moments remains a mystery. The forest seemed determined to hide something, and the questions surrounding Grover Ray's disappearance only added to the haunting atmosphere of Nez Perce Forest. Perhaps, like the other disappearances in this area, Grover's vanishing is part of a larger secret, a secret that the forest doesn't want to reveal. What had kept him from returning to camp, even though it was less than a mile away? What had held him captive in the deadly silence of Nez Perce Forest? The story of Grover Ray has no clear answers. All we know is the strangeness of the events surrounding his disappearance. Nez Perce Forest, with its endless shadows and unexplained phenomena, continues to guard its secrets, a secret we may never fully understand. But one thing is certain. This forest is not a place where people can easily walk in and out without leaving behind a part of their soul layers. If you've ever ventured into the wilds of Nez Perce National Forest, you would understand that it is not just a place for exploration, but a land of dark mysteries. The story of Brian Warner is one of the strangest disappearances among the many cases that this forest has witnessed. Brian Warner, 40, was a veteran and highly experienced hunter. He lived in Earl Rand, Idaho, and was well acquainted with the treacherous terrains of Nez Perce. But on October 1, 1951, the forest turned into a deadly trap, and Brian Warner never returned from his hunting trip. That day, Brian planned to hunt elk in an area near his family's mining site, a place he had traversed hundreds of times throughout his life. With the confidence of a man who had conquered many wild lands, he packed efficiently, carrying his rifle and enough food for several days. However, what Brian didn't anticipate was that the forest had changed since his last visit. It was no longer the familiar terrain, but seemed to be waiting for him with a deadly silence. The sky was clear and the air crisp that day, but strange signs began to emerge from the very first hours. Brian noticed an unusual quiet in the forest. The natural sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustling of wind through the trees, seemed to be cut off, leaving a void of silence. At times he thought he heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned to look, there was nothing but dense thickets of trees. Brian reassured himself that it was probably just the echo of his own footsteps. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake off the chilling sensation creeping up his spine. Hunters in Nez Perce Forest know one thing. If the forest becomes silent, it means something dangerous is lurking. Around midday, as Brian was following a small stream in search of elk tracks, the sky suddenly darkened ominously. Black clouds rolled in out of nowhere, covering the vast forest. Within minutes, a fierce snowstorm descended without warning. Brian realized he was caught in a storm he hadn't foreseen. The storm was so powerful that he had to find shelter. But in the vast wilderness, there was no place safe enough. The snow fell heavier, covering every path and transforming the forest into a strange, dangerous landscape. Brian realized he needed to return to camp as soon as possible, but the strange thing was, he could no longer remember the way back. Everything around him seemed to have shifted, and though he had walked these paths hundreds of times, they now seemed to lead to unfamiliar places. Places Brian had never seen before. The wind howled through the trees, making the branches collide with eerie creaks. The white snow covered everything, erasing all traces. Brian felt as if he was trapped in a giant maze with no way out. He tried to follow his own footprints, but they were completely buried by the snow. Each step now became a fight for survival. The next day, when Brian didn't return to camp, his brother Jack Warner grew worried. Jack was as skilled a hunter as Brian, and knew his brother wouldn't stay away for too long without communication. Jack decided to call the local sheriff and report Brian's disappearance. A rescue team was quickly assembled, with dozens of hunters, Forest Service personnel, and even helicopters. They searched for 2 weeks, but no trace of Brian was found. Strangely, the search dogs couldn't pick up any scent of him, even in areas Brian had likely passed through before the snowstorm hit. As the search team scoured the forest, many members began to feel an overwhelming sense of unease. A few reported hearing footsteps behind them as they ventured deeper into the woods, but when they turned around, there was nothing but the thick trees. Small noises like the whispers of wind or the cracking of branches occasionally echoed from afar, but no one could pinpoint their source. One hunter, Harold Green, recalled that on the 4th day of the search, he felt something was terribly wrong. As he crossed a small ravine, a chill ran down his spine for no apparent reason. He swore he heard footsteps trailing him. He stopped and looked around, but everything was swallowed by the thick, snowy mist. No one knew that this would be Harold's last time venturing into Nez Perce Forest. 2 weeks passed without any sign of Brian Warner. The official search was called off, but Jack Warner and his friends didn't give up hope. They continued searching for the rest of the year, but it seemed the forest had swallowed Brian into its darkness. There was no trace, no piece of clothing, no rifle. Everything had vanished along with him. Questions hung in the cold air of Nez Perce. How could Brian, an experienced hunter, have gotten lost in an area he knew so well? Why was there no sign of him, even after the search teams had combed through every corner? And why did the strange phenomena, unseen footsteps, the feeling of being watched, happen to so many members of the search party? Some theories began to emerge. Some believed Brian may have been attacked by a wild animal. But if that were the case, why were there no signs of a struggle or any traces of animals in the search area? Others speculated that he might have slipped and fallen into a deep ravine, but this too didn't explain his complete disappearance. The more time passed without answers, the more supernatural theories gained traction. Nez Perce Forest wasn't just a wild landscape, it was a place steeped in strange legends and myths. Some say that deep within the forest are lost spirits, beings that don't belong to this world. According to Nez Perce tribal lore, these entities would hunt down anyone who dared to trespass on their territory. Could Brian Warner have become prey to these invisible entities? Perhaps he was pulled into another world, a world with no escape. The more people delved into the mysterious stories surrounding the forest, the clearer it became that something wasn't right here. Survivors who ventured into Nez Perce often recounted feeling an invisible presence watching them, though no one could ever see it. Perhaps Brian encountered one of these beings, an entity living in the shadows of the forest, always waiting for its prey. The unseen footsteps, the feeling of being followed, all pointed to the possibility that Brian had been hunted, and it was that which kept him from ever returning to camp. The story of Brian Warner's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. Whatever truly happened to him that day in the dark, ominous Nez Perce Forest is known only to the forest itself. But the forest never speaks. It keeps its secrets, swallowing all traces, waiting for the next adventurer to step into its shadowy embrace. Ron Hufford was a mechanical engineer, an experienced hunter, and a man who entered Nez Perce National Forest in October 1956 with confidence and deep knowledge of the land. But what Ron didn't know was that the forest had always been waiting for adventurers like him, those who were certain they could conquer it. Ron Hufford's story is one of the most mysterious disappearances, not only because he knew Nez Perce like the back of his hand, but also due to the bizarre circumstances surrounding his vanishing. Ron Hufford, 28 years old, was a mechanical engineer and a seasoned hunter. He had spent years working for the National Forest Service at Lolo Pass, Idaho, and the Buffalo Hump area, where he disappeared, was not unfamiliar to him. He had hunted there many times before, and the dense forests, steep hills, and rushing rivers were familiar landscapes. But on October 1st, 1956, when he decided to go on a solo hunt, Ron had no idea that he would soon become part of the horrifying legends of Nez Perce Forest. Buffalo Hump is a particularly treacherous wilderness, with sharp mountain ridges and deep valleys. It is an area where only the most experienced hunters dare to tread, as even a small mistake can lead to grave consequences. But for Ron, it was just another journey he had made many times before, and he had no reason to doubt his safety. That morning, the weather was beautiful. The sky was clear, and the air was crisp. Ron decided to hunt a large elk he had heard about from other hunters in the area. He packed his rifle, food, and other essentials for a long day of hunting. No one knew that it would be the last time they would see Ron walking into the forest. When Ron didn't return that evening as planned, no one thought much of it. He often camped overnight if the hunt extended, and with his experience, he could survive in the forest for days without trouble. But as one day passed, then two, without any word from Ron, worry began to creep into the minds of his family and friends. They knew something wasn't right. The search began 3 days after Ron's disappearance. Friends, family, and National Forest Service employees scoured every corner of Buffalo Hump, from the valleys to the mountain peaks. Everyone believed Ron had simply gotten lost, possibly due to sudden weather changes or a minor accident. But as the search stretched on, no trace of him was found. There were no footprints, no torn fabric, and no signs of a struggle. The area where Ron disappeared was particularly hazardous, with sheer cliffs and fast-moving rivers. But given his familiarity with the terrain, Ron should have been able to survive in such conditions. So the biggest question on everyone's mind was, how could a skilled hunter like Ron completely vanish? As the search continued, strange phenomena began to surface. Some members of the search party reported feeling something off as they ventured deeper into the area where Ron had disappeared. Jack Lawrence, a hunter in the group, said he heard footsteps behind him while searching for signs of Ron. He stopped, looked around, but saw nothing but thick branches. Yet, the feeling didn't go away. The sensation of being watched, observed by something unseen. Others reported hearing strange noises at night, whispers, soft laughter echoing from the treetops. These sounds were inexplicable, and they only heightened the fear and tension among the search party. One man even had to leave the area, unable to endure the eerie sensations that seemed to engulf him. It felt as though the forest was trying to communicate something, but no one could understand it. About a week after Ron's disappearance, a severe snowstorm unexpectedly hit the Buffalo Hump area. Snow fell thick and fast, covering any remaining tracks and making the search even more challenging. But the search team didn't give up. They knew that if Ron were still alive, he needed to be found before the weather worsened. A search group, led by the local sheriff, ventured deep into the area where Ron had been hunting. They crossed frozen streams, climbed slippery cliffs, and revisited areas that had already been thoroughly searched. But oddly enough, despite searching every nook and cranny, no trace of Ron was found. It seemed as if the forest had swallowed him, making him disappear into thin air. A member of the search team, Harry Coleman, recalled that while climbing a cliff, he saw a shadow pass quickly ahead as though someone was moving swiftly through the forest. He called out Ron's name, but no one answered. The shadow vanished into the mist, leaving Harry with a spine-chilling feeling. Although he knew it could have been a trick of the snow and fog, the sensation haunted him for the rest of the search. Buffalo Hump had long been infamous for strange stories. According to Perce legends, the area wasn't just home to wild animals, but also to lost spirits. These spirits, according to the tales, had once lived and died in the area centuries ago. They were trapped between two worlds, unable to move on, always seeking out the living to pull them into the realm of the dead. Some believed that the strange disappearances in Nez Perce Forest, including Ron Hufford's, were connected to supernatural entities. It was said that when you ventured deep into the Buffalo Hump area, you could sense the presence of these spirits. They would watch you, and if you weren't careful, they would lead you into areas from which you could never escape. Perhaps Ron encountered something in the forest, something not of this world. Some in the search team began to believe the theory that Ron had been pulled into another dimension, a place that human eyes could not perceive. They reasoned that if Ron had simply gotten lost, a footprint, a scratch on a tree, or at the very least his rifle. But nothing was found. The search for Ron Hufford lasted for many weeks, but it eventually had to be called off due to the harsh weather conditions. No signs of him were ever found, and Ron's family had to accept the heartbreaking reality that he might never return. But the questions remained, hanging in the cold air of Perce forest. What happened to Ron? How could a man with such survival skills vanish completely? Did he suffer an accident, or was he pulled into another world, a world beyond our understanding? Perce forest, with its dark secrets, continues to swallow those brave enough to enter its domain. Disappearances like Ron Hufford's are just the tip of the iceberg. The ghosts of the forest, the whispers in the night, and the strange occurrences continue to haunt those who dare face the mystery. Ron Hufford disappeared in that forest, but his story lives on, a warning to all who seek to explore Perce. There are some things that humans should never seek to understand too deeply. James Madison, 67 years old, was a seasoned hunter with decades of experience in the Perce forest. He had spent his entire life exploring the wilderness, surviving in the harshest conditions, and always knowing how to return safely. But on September 11, 1952, Madison entered the Salmon River area to fetch water for his trip, a seemingly simple task that turned out to be the first step into the trap set by the mysterious forest. Madison wasn't alone. He was with a group of other hunters who had set up camp not far from the Salmon River. Everything was going as usual until that fateful afternoon when he decided to head to the river alone to fetch water. It was an old habit of his, leaving camp in the afternoon, after a day of hunting, to find the nearest water source. No one in the group thought this routine task would lead to Madison's mysterious disappearance. The last time his friend saw James, he was still wearing his old leather jacket, carrying a bucket, and walking along the path toward the river. He never returned. As night fell and Madison still hadn't come back to camp, his friends started to worry. They called his name several times, but only heard their own voices echo back through the silent forest. The wind began to blow harder, creating eerie sounds as it whistled through the trees. The hunters assumed that perhaps James had gotten lost or had a minor accident, but with his vast experience, they believed he would know how to find his way back to camp. However, when dawn broke and Madison was still nowhere to be found, the group began organizing a search. They followed the path he had taken, but found no trace of Madison. That was when they realized something had gone terribly wrong, and this wasn't just a case of being lost. The strangest part was that the river Madison had set out for was less than a mile from camp. It was an easy path, with no treacherous terrain or obvious threats. How could an experienced hunter like Madison disappear completely in an area he knew like the back of his hand? When the hunters were unable to find Madison after 2 days, they reported the incident to the authorities. An official search began, involving rescue teams, police, and the National Forest Service. The search teams were well equipped, utilizing scent dogs and the most advanced search technologies of the time, but all efforts proved futile. There were no footprints, no scraps of clothing, and no signs that Madison had ever been in the area. One of the most perplexing phenomena occurred when the search dogs were brought in. They started following Madison's trail from the campsite, but as they neared the river, where Madison was supposed to collect water, they suddenly stopped and refused to go any further. Some of the dogs even began whimpering and turned back, as if something invisible had terrified them. Several members of the rescue team also reported strange sensations as they ventured deeper into the search area. Frank Miller, a rescue worker, recounted feeling as though something was watching him as he walked along the riverbank. It felt like someone was standing right behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing, Miller said. That feeling didn't go away. It haunted me throughout the search. The search for James Madison lasted 2 weeks, but no progress was made. During that time, the weather suddenly shifted. Fierce storms struck the area, bringing heavy rain and lightning. The region around the Salmon River became muddy and more treacherous than ever before. Many members of the search team had to pause their efforts due to the worsening conditions. During the stormy nights, the searchers began hearing strange noises coming from the forest. It wasn't the wind or the trees creaking, it was something more subtle but distinct. Soft footsteps on dry leaves, unintelligible whispers, and at times chilling cries echoing from afar. Some people began to believe that the forest wasn't just an ordinary wilderness. Perhaps there was something, an invisible force lurking in the shadows, controlling and manipulating those who ventured into its domain. To many, Madison's disappearance was just a small part of a larger series of strange and mysterious events happening in Nez Perce Forest. Nearly 2 weeks after the search began, James Madison's body was found. It was discovered in an area not far from the river he had set out to reach, but the odd part was that this area had already been thoroughly searched multiple times before. It seemed as though his body had been moved or somehow hidden during the entire search. Madison's body was found in an advanced state of decomposition, but there were no obvious signs of an animal attack. However, what shocked everyone were the injuries to Madison's legs. They were badly wounded, with deep scratches, as if he had tried to climb over rough terrain or had been dragged across the ground. It appeared that Madison had fought a fierce battle with something. But what? The official cause of death was listed as exhaustion, but many on the search team didn't accept this conclusion. How could someone like Madison, in good health and with vast hunting experience, die of exhaustion after just 1 day of being lost? The injuries on his body suggested he had endured a violent struggle before his death, but no one could explain what that struggle had been with. Madison's disappearance and death led to many different theories, ranging from being attacked by a wild animal to the possibility of being trapped in some natural hazard. However, none of these theories could fully explain the strange events that occurred throughout the search. Some began to believe that, like other disappearances in Nez Perce Forest, Madison had encountered a supernatural force. It was said that the Salmon River area had long been considered sacred by the Nez Perce people, a place where the spirits of their ancestors still lingered. Ancient legends told that those who dared to trespass on this land without the spirits' permission would pay for it with their lives. Perhaps Madison had encountered something beyond anyone's understanding, a powerful, invisible force controlling the fate of those who entered its territory. The unseen footsteps, the feeling of being watched, and the strange marks on Madison's body only added to the eerie nature of this story. The disappearance and death of James Madison have become one of the greatest mysteries of the Nez Perce Forest. What truly happened to him in the final hours of his life? What caused an experienced hunter like Madison to suffer such severe injuries and ultimately die of exhaustion? These questions may never be answered, as the Nez Perce Forest keeps its secrets, and perhaps it is something that will never be revealed. The Nez Perce Forest continues to swallow those who step into its shadows, and James Madison's story serves as yet another warning to those who dare to face it. Will anyone else mysteriously vanish like Madison? Will this forest continue to hide its dark secrets forever? Only time and those brave enough to venture in will know. All the disappearances occurred within the Nez Perce Forest, a place known for its vast, treacherous, and unpredictable terrain. The area is filled with rushing rivers, steep cliffs, and dense, almost impenetrable forests. Yet, what's strange is that most of the victims were experienced hunters, well-versed in navigating such harsh conditions. While dangerous terrain may have played a role in some accidents, it doesn't explain why people like Grover Ray, Ron Hufford, or James Schroeder vanished without leaving a single trace. The forest seems to have the ability to swallow people, and in many cases their bodies were only found after weeks, months, or even years of searching, sometimes in areas that had already been combed through by search teams. Buffalo Hump, Gedney Creek, and the Salmon River. These names are not just locations on a map, they are hotspots for mysterious disappearances. All 5 victims disappeared near rivers, streams, or canyons, an element that cannot be ignored. Could it be that these areas harbor some supernatural power, or do they simply create the perfect circumstances for inexplicable disappearances? Another noticeable pattern is the sudden and extreme changes in weather associated with each case. For James Schroeder, a snowstorm hit shortly after his disappearance. Brian Warner encountered an unexpected snowstorm while hunting in the fall. Ron Hufford vanished during bad weather conditions when storms made the search extremely difficult. And when James Madison's body was found, the weather had also turned foul, making tracking nearly impossible. Storms, heavy snowfalls, and sudden temperature drops are not uncommon in this wilderness. But what leaves people questioning is why these storms seem to strike at the exact moment the victims disappear. Is the weather just a random natural factor, or is it part of a larger, more mysterious sequence of events? One theory suggests that these harsh weather conditions exacerbated the victims' disorientation, causing them to become lost or suffer unfortunate accidents. However, no one can explain why the weather is so closely linked to their disappearances, or why it suddenly worsens right before or after they vanish. Reports from search teams and survivors reveal another common thread among these cases: a strange atmosphere, a sense of pressure, and inexplicable feelings of dread. Several searchers reported feeling as though they were being watched as they ventured deeper into the forest, and many heard quiet footsteps behind them, only to find nothing but darkness and silence when they turned around. In Brian Warner's case, strange sounds and shadowy figures led some in the search team to withdraw due to overwhelming unease. For Ron Hufford, some members of the search party even heard eerie laughter and whispers from the treetops, leading many to believe that this forest is not just a natural landscape, but home to something supernatural. This sense of being stalked was not limited to searchers. Even the victims themselves are said to have encountered similar phenomena before they disappeared. Both James Schroeder and Grover Ray reportedly heard mysterious sounds and felt the presence of something invisible following them before they vanished. In James Madison's case, the injuries on his body indicated that he had fought against something before his death. But what that was, no one knows. Another common factor among the cases is the eventual discovery of some victims' bodies after long periods of searching. Grover Ray's body was found 2 years after he disappeared, right in an area that had already been thoroughly searched. James Schroeder and James Madison were also found after several days or even weeks, despite search teams repeatedly combing through the same area. This raises a significant question. Why were the victims' bodies only found after search efforts had been abandoned? Had they been there the entire time, undetected? Or had they been moved to those locations after their deaths? And if someone or something moved their bodies, who or what was responsible? The marks on James Madison's and Grover Ray's bodies also deepen the mystery. Their wounds, not caused by wild animals, suggest they encountered an unexplainable force, perhaps an invisible entity or a power within the forest. This not only raises questions about their cause of death, but also about what truly happened to them before their bodies were found. While many theories have been proposed about these disappearances, none can explain all the mysterious factors involved. Some believe the victims were attacked by wild animals, but the absence of signs of struggle and clear injuries makes this theory unlikely. Another theory is that the victims suffered natural accidents, such as falling into ravines or being swept away by powerful rivers. Yet no clear evidence supports this, and none of the bodies were found in conditions consistent with such accidents. The questions remain, hanging like a dark cloud over the Perce forest. What really happened to these experienced hunters? Did they encounter something in the forest, a supernatural force, an invisible creature, or a natural phenomenon we don't yet understand? And why does this forest continue to be the site of such mysterious disappearances? The conclusion regarding the disappearances in the Perce forest remains beyond human comprehension. Despite decades of search efforts, investigations, and research, the truth about what happened to James Schroeder, Grover Ray, Brian Warner, Ron Hufford, James Madison, and many others remains an unsolved mystery. Perhaps the Perce forest will continue to keep its secrets, a place where time and space don't follow the rules of the outside world, where those who enter may never return. These disappearances are just a small part of a larger puzzle surrounding this forest, a puzzle that contains elements we may never fully understand. Perce forest, with its whispering winds through the trees, shadowy figures lurking in the mist, and its deathly silence, continues to test the courage of those who dare to enter. But like the victims who vanished, those brave adventurers may never find their way out of this enigmatic land.